Kindness is something that most parents try to teach their children, and we're certainly all flattered to be called kind ourselves. But how much time do we really spend focusing on what it means to be kind and putting that into action?
Kindness is love in action, essentially. We need to put effort into it, and often more than we think that we're already doing.
That's Dr. Tarik Cousineau, a clinical psychologist and author of the book, The Kindness Cure, How the Science of Compassion Can Heal Your Heart and Your World. Cousineau says she was inspired to write about and teach kindness because she simply wasn't seeing very much of it in her everyday life.
One of the things that came up for me a few years ago, I would say this is in the year 2015, 2016, there was a lot of negative cultural discourse, and I was also seeing it in our communities, even in our own hometown. Our Holocaust memorial was desecrated.
That feeling is something most of us can probably relate to, being overwhelmed by negativity in the news and the world around us. But Cousineau says what she eventually realized was that it probably wasn't the world itself getting worse, but rather it was just her perception of it.
We are so overexposed to negativity, whether it's in our communities or in the news, for instance, that we actually have to learn how to offset that negativity bias, if you will, by choosing to be more thoughtful, to be generous, to drop our judgments and our preconceived notion about who people are. And that takes a little bit of work.
Cousineau says a great example of how that overexposure can break us down was her own daughter's reaction to the Boston Marathon bombing.
And my 12-year-old comes and says to me, "Mom, what is going on? Isn't there any place that's safe in the world?" That's a very human response. It's a very human experience. And I think whether you're a parent or not, we're constantly being exposed to this kind of experience. And we forget that actually we live in a less violent world. It's more democratic than ever before. We have lots of freedoms that we don't appreciate. And we actually really need to cultivate almost an orientation to looking for the good in the world. So one simple practice is, how can I find kindfulness in this moment? Or how can I bring kindness to this moment? And really have that as a daily mantra and see how it shifts your experience.
You may have heard Cousineau say kindfulness in that last thought of hers. Kindfulness is a phrase she writes about at length in her book. And it's one of those things she says we can all use as a tool against that overexposure to the negativity in the world.
Basically, it's being aware of the present moment with heart. So if we can actually learn to slow ourselves down and to pause and to actually really take in what is in front of us instead of running on empty, making assumptions, we would be in a better place. So partly we actually have to reduce our stress response through basic activities like taking a few breaths, walking in nature, listening to quiet music, not infiltrating our brains with so much information. So we really need to kind of push the pause button, if you will.
And a part of hitting that pause button is learning to be kinder to ourselves. Cousineau says that before we can bring kindness to others, we need to be kind within our own selves and stop comparing ourselves to others.
I've been a clinical psychologist for 20 years. I feel that I see this uptick in the amount of, or the level of emotional discontent that people have. There's so much ranking and rating in the world these days. Everything comes down to numbers. And we really need to actually work to be aware that that's what trap we're falling in, so that we can stand back and say, okay, I'm a good person. My orientation to life is to be kind. I like connecting with people. How do I do this more? How do I contribute in some way that makes me feel good and also is potentially beneficial to other people?
In addition to unkind self-comparisons, we can lose some of our inner kindness due to something called compassion fatigue. That's the phenomenon where the more we're exposed to stories of others' suffering, the more immune we become to our own sympathy, and the less kind we may be in response.
We become overcome with the feelings, the emotions, and the experiences that other people are having. And that can contribute to what has commonly been called compassion fatigue. But actually what the scientists are saying is that it's actually not compassion fatigue, it's empathy fatigue. And there's actually a difference. There's different neural networks in the brain that's attributed to each one of those states. Compassion is recognizing the suffering in another person. But it also involves a wishing well for the other person, being able to conjure up warm feelings of care. We don't become so overcome by the distress of another person's pain. So there's really sort of an art and science to moving from empathy fatigue to an experience of compassion, and we can build resilience around that. But there definitely is a risk. There's a risk for, adult children of parents with Alzheimer's disease. Any caregiving capacity can burn ourselves out. So it takes a practice to be able to know when you need to take a break, when you need to step back, when you need to ask for help. We all need to let our bodies restore because we cannot sustain being in empathic distress for too long.
Cousineau says that both our tendency to compare ourselves to others and our so-called compassion or empathy fatigue can lead to a lot of stress and anxiety. And the cure for all of that is something that's easier in theory than practice. Actively noticing all of the good in the world around us.
I always say that, awareness is the first step. It's just tuning into your own stress response, your brand of thinking, and learning how to calm yourself down. So meditation, mindfulness activities, walking in nature, social support, reaching out for help, understanding, is your inner critic speaking too loudly, and how to manage that inner critic, right? And that's actually a lot of the work that I do with clients is to really kind of understand that the thoughts and the emotions and the sensations that you're having are actually just thoughts, emotions, and sensations. They're not who you are, and they don't define who you are. You actually can really learn how to work with those kinds of experiences in a much kinder and gentler way than people really are doing.
The more tuned into the world we all are, and the more we learn to appreciate ourselves, the easier it will be for us to be kind to those around us. And if we can all learn to be kinder, Cousineau says, the more positivity there will be for others to notice and continue that cycle forward.
One of the experiences I had when I started writing the book is I asked people, I'm like, what does kindness mean to you? How does kindness fit in your life? Do you have a kindness story? And it was so interesting to me is that people actually had to stop and think about it, like really dig into their memory banks for an experience. And I think that part of the reason is that we let the good moments pass us by. We don't pay enough attention. We don't appreciate the kindnesses that happen. We take them for granted. So one of the things is every day is to notice kindness when it happens, and then to really kind of experience it and let it kind of stick into your memory banks. Having a gratitude or kindness journal is really helpful in that regard, and it's because we really do need to offset that negativity by redirecting our attention. A lot of this is about redirecting attention to the good in the world, looking for the good stories, talking with your kids or your friends or family about, what was the high point of your day and why? Simple question can do a lot.
Dr. Tarik Cousineau's book, The Kindness Cure, is available now. For information on all of our guests, visit our site, viewpointsonline.net. You can find us on Twitter at Viewpoints Radio. Our show is written and produced by Evan Rook. Our executive producer is Reed Pence. Our production director is Sean Waldron. I'm Marty Peterson.